For most of us, World War I is something relegated to the history books, but there's no denying that its impact was felt for generations. At the Knights of Columbus Museum in New Haven, the Great War comes alive at a special exhibit that showcases not only the war itself, but the Knights' involvement in the war relief effort, as well as its fundraising drives and hospitality centers. Steve KILTONIC spent an afternoon touring the exhibit and has this story.
World War I was the world's first international conflict. It's the first war where planes, tanks, machine guns, and poison gas were used in deadly fashion. It's estimated that during the Great War, from 1914 until 1918, 11 million soldiers died, while civilian casualties exceeded 20 million. After the war ended, the map of Europe was completely redrawn.
Over there, send the word, over there.
President Woodrow Wilson formally entered America into the war on April 6, 1917. By Armistice Day, November 18, 1918, 116,000 Americans gave their lives in the bloody conflict. Of these, 1,600 belonged to the Knights of Columbus. Lieutenant William Fitzsimmons, a Knight, was the first American officer to die in the war, killed during a German air raid. 2017 marks the 100th anniversary of the U.S. participation in the so-called War to End All Wars. To commemorate the event, the Knights of Columbus Museum has unveiled an exhibit entitled World War I Beyond the Front Lines. The exhibition gives an historical retrospective of the war, along with interactives, images, and artifacts from the KFC Museum, Supreme Council, and Multimedia Archives, as well as borrowed materials from private lenders and organizations, such as the National World War I Museum. On display, you'll find helmets and caps from both sides, as well as replicas of uniforms, which visitors can even try on. The exhibit includes various war-related items, like these Trent's binoculars, buttons, and pins. Bethany Sheffer, the curator of the museum, walked us through the three main galleries of the exhibit. The first focuses on the origins of the war, the second puts visitors in the war, and the third explains the Knights' involvement as a war relief agency. James Flaherty was the Supreme Knight at the beginning of America's involvement in the war. He developed a War Activities Committee, chaired by Colonel P.H. Callahan, that initially was the official fundraiser for all Catholic organizations in America. But the Knights first needed to get approval from General George Pershing, Supreme Commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, before they could help in the war effort.
He was very animate about making sure there was no duplication of services. So he wanted the Knights to work with other organizations, so they did convince him with the YMCA, as well as I believe it's the Red Cross, that they all got together and talked about what they could all do. And based on that, the Pershing said, yes, all right, you can serve here.
During the war, colorful posters were used by Knights to advertise their large-scale fundraising effort to support their services. The drive was hugely successful, raising ultimately $14 million.
All of the proceeds went towards funding the recreation centers, which we call huts.
The huts became the focal point for the Knight war relief activities throughout the war. Vivian Lee Solik is the archivist for the museum.
Their slogan was everybody welcome, everything free. Everything the Knights did, all that they gave away, the candy, the gum, the cigarettes, the coffee, tea, hot chocolate, all of that was given freely to men in uniform.
At the huts, soldiers could get a brief respite from the horrors of war, regardless of race or religion.
The soldiers knew when their day was done, they could come into the Knights of Columbus hut, relax, write a letter home, perhaps gather around the piano or the gramophone and sing a popular song of the day. So it really gave them a place to relax for just a minute and forget what was going on in the world.
The huts were simple structures that were built on military bases in the U.S., like this one at Camp Zachary Taylor. Overseas, the Knights opened huts primarily in existing buildings.
It would have a library of some sort where they would have newspapers, magazines, popular reading of the period, as well as books.
In addition, the Knights also manufactured Bibles and other religious materials.
We also produce little miniature books that are approximately 2 inches by 2 inches. They are serializations of popular stories of the day. They could take them, put them in their packs. When they're done, they trade it with their buddies. So the miniature books were very popular with the soldiers.
For the 100,000 Catholic U.S. servicemen who were knights, the huts were used for celebrating Mass and receiving the sacraments like confession. On display is a chaplain's Mass kit that would have been used in the hut. Here, soldiers could also watch theater productions and attend dances.
One of the things that the Knights actually provided was stationery so that you could write to home, and we have a few in our collection.
Athletics were also an integral part of recreational activities.
They had teams, and they would distribute baseball bats and gloves aboard the ships as well as within the Army, and would host boxing matches, so they distributed boxing gloves as well. And they actually taught classes too, because boxing at that time was incredibly popular.
A Hall of Fame baseball player was also a knight.
We also had some very famous baseball players of the day who were knights. Johnny Evers of the Evers to Tinker to Chance, the double play. He was a secretary and toured Europe promoting baseball, teaching people how to umpire the game.
The huts were run by KFC secretaries, nicknamed Casey's. They wore uniforms exactly the same as those in the Army, except with a KC logo. The Knights built mobile food trucks to distribute food.
They actually had a rolling kitchen. They had one version is an actual truck that just drives along. The other is an actual roller kitchen which attaches to a vehicle, and you can cook things with it too. They would also go close to the front too and provide things like chocolate and tobacco to troops as they go by. So they weren't just in the huts as well. They went into the hospitals to provide comfort for those who were wounded.
In the huts, the KFC chaplains provided spiritual support. Many, including Father John Duval, the angel of the trenches, risked their lives. The exhibit features Father Duval's war items, including medals, helmet, and tunic. He never recovered from exposure to mustard gas and died shortly after the war. Chicopee native and First Lieutenant William Davitt was a knight, chaplain, and pastor of St. Anne's in Lenox. He volunteered to serve with the 125th Infantry. Davitt received an American Service Medal and French Croix de Guerre for leading a rescue squad that saved the lives of 40 soldiers trapped under enemy fire. Father Davitt was killed by shrapnel from an explosion just over an hour before the armistice went into effect. He is recognized as the last officer killed in World War I. The Davitt Bridge and VFW Post 625 in Chicopee are named in his honor. Here, his original citation and French medal can be found. One of the major attractions here at the exhibit is the actual recreation of a trench, where visitors can actually get a sense and feel of what it must have been like to fight from one of these trenches. It comes complete with machine guns firing, bombs exploding, and planes in dogfight. And you can even see the enemy on the other side through this periscope.
Our trench is amazing compared to what a real trench would have looked like. It's much bigger so that more people can utilize it, but a real trench would have been maybe 2 feet. The walking space would have been about 2 feet.
After the war, the Knights remained in Europe as long as soldiers were there. At a German hut, 40,000 donuts a day were made by the night bakers for the hungry troops. Once the doughboys came home, they provided recruitment agencies and services to help vets find employment. The Knights' involvement in the war ended in 1921. By then, they had rightfully earned the respect of the veterans and country with their message of charity, care, and Christ. The World War I exhibit will be open through December 30th, 2018. A series of war-related lectures and presentations will also be offered. You can find more information on the World War I exhibit through a link on iobserve.org. For Reel to Reel, I'm Steve Kiltonic.
If you're planning to visit the World War I exhibit or any other Knights of Columbus event, the museum is open daily, 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. There are permanent collections on display, as well as admission and parking are always free.